In the early 1970s, a farmer in rural Bavaria was digging a drainage trench when his shovel broke into empty space. What he found was a tunnel, deliberately built, nearly 1,000 years old, which means in the medieval period, people were constructing underground passages that didn't lead anywhere, didn't connect to homes, and were so tight that a person has to exhale just to squeeze through. And this wasn't one tunnel, it was 700, spread across Europe, which raises a very precise problem. What exactly were these people building? And why does nobody remember? Just northeast of Cusco, Peru, there is a limestone rock that most people walk past without stopping. It doesn't rise dramatically above the landscape. It doesn't demand your attention from a distance. It sits low to the ground, partially covered by scrub, its surface worn gray gold in the afternoon light. It's called Qenko. In the original Quechua language, the name means zigzag, and when you get close enough to actually look at it, you start to understand why that name was chosen. Because someone carved this rock, not in the way of art. No faces, no animals, no stories etched into the surface. The carving is something else entirely. Running across the top of the rock, cut directly into the limestone, is a network of narrow channels. They branch, they converge. In some places, they run parallel to each other. In others, they curve in tight, deliberate arcs that follow no obvious pattern. But here's what stops you cold. The edges are clean. The depth is consistent all the way through. Whoever made these worked carefully. They worked for a long time, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The channels slope, subtly, but consistently. Whatever was meant to move through them moved in a direction, which means these weren't decorative. They were functional. Then the researchers went underneath the rock. And that's where it gets harder to explain. Carved into the rock from below is a chamber, low ceiling, roughly oval shape, flat floor, and the same careful tool markings on the walls as the channels above. Inside the chamber, a flat altar-like platform, and cut into the walls 2 narrow niches, the kind of shape found across the Andean world, associated with offerings, or the dead. So now you have 2 things. Channels on top that carried something in a direction, and a chamber below that something may have entered. But the connection between the two has never been fully mapped. Whether the liquid from above actually reached the space below, nobody can say for certain. Archaeologists have proposed explanations. Chicha, the fermented ritual drink of the Inca world, ceremonial blood, rainwater redirected during specific seasons to carry symbolic meaning. Some have suggested the channels were part of a much larger hydraulic ritual network, one that once stretched across this entire ceremonial landscape and no longer exists in any form we can verify. None of these explanations have been confirmed. And here is the precise problem at the center of Qenko. The carving is too careful to be accidental, too deliberate to be decorative. It looks exactly like engineering, but the engineering, if that's what it is, serves a purpose that the physical evidence alone cannot tell us. Someone stood on this rock, perhaps 2,000 years ago, maybe more. They looked at the surface, they picked up their tools, and they began to cut, slowly, carefully, with full knowledge of what each line was for, and where it was supposed to lead. That knowledge existed once. It was held by real people, who woke up in the morning, who worked through the afternoon, who finished this rock and understood completely what they had built. And then, it was gone. The channels are still here. The chamber is still here. The careful, precise, deliberate cuts in the limestone are still here, exactly as they left them. But whatever moved through those channels, whatever entered that chamber below, whatever this place was actually for, didn't survive the people who built it. And the rock just sits there, quiet, worn gray gold in the afternoon light, still waiting to be understood. In the early 1970s, a farmer in rural Bavaria was digging a drainage trench on his property. Ordinary work, ordinary morning. Then his shovel broke through into empty space. He assumed it was a root cavity, a natural hollow in the soil, He widened the opening, lowered a lantern inside. What he found was not a natural hollow. It was a tunnel, smooth walls, level floor, consistent dimensions from one end to the other, deliberately built by human hands. Except the dimensions were strange. The tunnel was roughly 60 to 70 centimeters wide, just enough for a human body, not much more. It was not an isolated find. As investigation widened over the following decades, similar tunnels began appearing across southern Germany, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, Bohemia. The confirmed count eventually surpassed 700 sites. 700. They became known as Erdstall, a German word that translates roughly as earthen places, and the name itself is old. Medieval documents reference them. Local folklore had a name for them long before archaeology did. Researchers began the slow work of documentation. They measured, they photographed, they mapped tunnel systems section by section, sometimes crawling through narrow passages for hours just to chart a single site. And several things became clear very quickly, each one harder to explain than the last. First, no signs of occupation, no tools, no discarded objects, no evidence that anyone ever lived in these spaces. Whatever they were used for, they were not lived in. Second, many of the tunnels had no practical outlet. They didn't connect to homes. They didn't lead anywhere useful. They began wound through the earth for anywhere from 5 to 50 meters, and then simply stopped. Not collapsed, not blocked, just a smooth, finished wall, built not to go anywhere, built simply to exist. But the third detail is the one that resists easy explanation. At irregular intervals throughout the tunnels, the passage narrows suddenly and deliberately, down to less than 50 centimeters at its tightest point. To get through, a person has to exhale completely, press themselves flat, and force their body through. Then, on the other side, the tunnel widens again as if nothing happened. This narrowing appears too consistently across separate tunnel systems and across a wide geographic region to be accidental. It was engineered, and because it serves no structural purpose, no reinforcement or load-bearing function, it was built for a reason that is not architectural. That knowledge had a beginning. It spread across borders and generations. And then it stopped. The tunnels are still there, still smooth, still ending in walls that were never meant to be exits, waiting underground in the dark exactly as they were left. In the northeastern corner of Wyoming, the land is open, flat, quiet, rolling grassland, long sight lines in every direction. The kind of landscape where you can see for miles and nothing surprises you. And then it's just there, rising from the valley floor, without any warning, without any geological buildup, is Devil's Tower, 386 meters above the surrounding terrain, its summit reaching 1,558 meters above sea level, its base roughly 300 meters across, narrowing as it rises. But none of those numbers are what stops you. What stops you are the columns, hundreds of them, running vertically from the ground all the way to the flat summit in near-perfect parallel lines. Most are 4 to 7-sided, each column somewhere between 1.2 and 2.4 meters across. Regular, consistent, geometric. They don't look natural. They look designed, like something deliberate, like something that required planning, like something that could not have happened by accident. That reaction is understandable. And in a narrow sense, it's not entirely wrong. Here is what actually happened. Around 50 million years ago, molten rock pushed upward into the sedimentary layers beneath this region. And then it began to cool. Cooling rock contracts. As it contracts, it fractures. And those fractures follow a predictable geometry, distributing stress as evenly as possible across the cooling mass. The result is columns. The same process created the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, Fingal's Cave in Scotland. It is a known geological phenomenon. It has a name. It has been studied and documented and explained. At Devil's Tower, it happened entirely underground, hidden inside the earth for tens of millions of years. What brought it into view was erosion. Slowly, over an enormous stretch of time, the softer rock surrounding the formation was stripped away by water and weather. The harder igneous core remained. The columns were always there. Erosion didn't shape them. It only revealed them. For the indigenous peoples of the northern plains, this formation has carried meaning for far longer than any geological survey. The Lakota know it as Bear Lodge. The Cheyenne, the Kiowa, the Arapaho. Each nation has its own name for it, each reflecting a relationship with this place that is ceremonial and ongoing and very much alive today. When the United States designated Devil's Tower as the country's first national monument in 1906, it used a name with no connection to any of those traditions. That remains a point of active conversation around this site. Nature built this completely alone over 50 million years with no plan and no awareness of what it was making. Just molten rock cooling in the dark, fracturing along the path of least resistance for reasons that are purely physical. And yet the result looks exactly like something meant to be seen. A shape that makes people stop and stare. A formation that every human culture that has ever lived near it has felt the need to name, to explain, to make sacred. Somehow nature made this.